All right, now for the other perspective, the Democratic perspective, and a peek inside the manufacturing-rich state of Michigan, please welcome the ranking member of the Research and Technology Committee, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, to the stage. Congresswoman. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. So I don't know if you got a chance to hear Peter's comments about the tariff wall and improving manufacturing for the last several months. What is your take on this? I mean, you represent so many manufacturers, particularly the auto industry in Michigan.
Yeah, I am a manufacturing evangelist on behalf of Michigan and our not only robust automotive supply chain, but also defense and aerospace. This is really the envy of the world. You know, in my congressional district in Oakland County, Michigan, the I-75 corridor is this incredible concentration of innovation, small to mid-sized manufacturers who need one thing, and that is certainty. And they also want to compete on the global playing field, and they want to do so with trade rules that are followed and abided by. Look, we're at the quarter-century mark, and we recognize that China has not been playing by the same rules, and it is certainly time to get aggressive. But I think back to last year, and you know, look, new administration coming in, big, ticket items that they're trying to put forward, but 55 tariff announcements in 100 days was head spinning. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen as a result in the place that I call home is a pullback on investment. Some of this was also matched with a tax bill that rolled back some of the investments in new innovations. And there's some job loss. You know, instead of taking on China, we've started a trade war with Canada, and Michiganders are paying the price, right? Our small businesses are paying the price. So I remember in my freshman term in Congress, you know, I am a Democrat who flipped a long-held Republican seat. I did so by talking about manufacturing. I've done tremendous bipartisan work in the manufacturing and industrial policy space. I've had my bills signed by both presidents I've served under, or as a member of Congress during their administration. And, you know, I remember, reaching out to Mr. Lighthizer, Bob Lighthizer in particular, on those first stage tariffs and saying, hey, you know, can we get an exemption here? Can we do this? And there was an open and direct line of communication. And there was a healthy mode in some respects. Right now, we have been flooded. And, you know, I just have to say, we shouldn't be licking the bootstraps of China starting a trade war with Canada. We've got, you know, a second international crossing that is 20 years in the making at the Detroit River with the bridge, Gordie Howe Bridge. For some unknown reason, the Canadians paid for this bridge, but for some unknown reason, the president doesn't want to open this bridge. I mean, that alone is a national security risk, right? We can't just have one bridge, but it's a slap in the face to what we call in Michigan the downriver community. You know, I got 1,000 people with Cleveland Cliffs out of work right now, 1,000 workers. You know, and then I'm hearing we're doing foreign steel in the ballroom. Oh my gosh, you know, this isn't working. I want to cut deals for Michigan, not all these other countries. I need investment coming into my state now with a functional tax code and trade certainty.
So in your view, what's most effective? Is it not broad-based tariffs, but narrower tariffs? Is it border protection? What, in your view, is most effective?
Well, the way in which I am proposing that we move right now is through a piece of legislation that I authored and introduced last year called the No Chinese Cars Act. That would be 100% tariffs administered by the trade rep for Chinese vehicles, because we all know what they do. They fully subsidize, they dump into markets in various industry sectors, they belie costs, and our industries pay the price. I mean, look at this with drones, 3D printers, solar, and on. I will be damned to see this happen to the auto industry. So I think that's a good place to go. You've also seen, Section 301 stay in place. The other thing that we want to look at is the certainty with the North American trade. We want to be competing as a continent, globally. And so making Canada, our trade enemy in some respects. Look, I got small businesses in the northern part of my state, the Upper Peninsula. They're down 40% just because the Canadians aren't coming over. And look, even the auto workers are saying, we've got union members over here. Some of these are American companies. And, we've been kind of dealing with some head spinning on that front. And then seeing Canada cut a trade deal with China.
Yeah.
Ay.
Okay, so let's pivot a little bit. So I know you mentioned the Chinese Cars Act, but you're also sponsoring other pieces of legislation.
Yeah, I'm working with Senator Slotkin.
Right.
We've introduced, Protecting America from Chinese Cars Act. Look, folks, we need to get aggressive. The bill I'm doing with Slotkin is we do not want to let any Chinese car over our border, even for a day trip from Canada. Why? National security, that technology that's in those cars, the espionage, the, mapping of our land, our territories, ag, we can't allow that to happen, military bases and on. And then plus, we just want to be aggressive in terms of protecting ourselves economically. So, this is going to be a multi-pronged approach, and I'm also delighted to have done bipartisan work over a number of years on the strategic committee on select competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned, when you talk about Chinese cars coming in, and that's a national security issue. It's not just obviously narrowed down to Chinese cars, but there's a lot of discussion about Chinese LLMs. And there's recent reports on just how expensive AI is now becoming, the compute costs. Mm-hmm. And companies are now, or even startups or smaller developers are turning to Chinese AI companies and Chinese LLMs. And I'm curious, being that you're on the the Research and Technology Subcommittee, what is your view on the national security risks that are being posed by Chinese AI companies, and potentially some of those loopholes as people start looking at the real costs of AI?
Yeah, and look, this is a Michigan moment and a Michigan call to action in many respects, because the innovation, the industrial sector, the way in which the design process has been influenced by artificial intelligence. There are incredible supplier companies have been using this technology for the benefit of our productivity, but it is following a rules-based order. This is a national call to action in terms of the guardrails that we need to put up on AI and to look at costs. The American consumer is in arrears. Okay, we've got $1.3 trillion of credit card debt. Mark my words, this is one that keeps me up at night as someone who served in the Obama administration under Steve Ratner and Ron Bloom on the U.S. Auto Rescue. We all remember that time period where the housing sector was bottoming out, our industrial sector was staring off a precipice. If we get this ballooning consumer debt continuing to grow, because the math doesn't math. I mean, even the Wall Street Journal's writing about this, right? The grocery bill's high, the utility bill's high, accessing of technology costs is high, and we could start to see defaulting. And in Michigan, this concerns me when jobs are on the line. So we have got to bolster American innovation in a place called Michigan, is always my preference, but we have got to bolster American innovation and call for action right now. We can't be laissez-faire. They manipulate markets. They manipulate open free market capitalism. We still want that system, our rules-based system where we're, a democracy promoting freedom and the pursuit of happiness. But my goodness gracious, you can't just let these guys come in, and eat our lunch. It's just not going to work. And so, look, I was in an R&D lab before I was in elected office. I was in what is called the IoT space, right? I'm sure many of you in this room know about it. That's AI now. That is artificial intelligence. We were looking at basic scientific research, workforce development, and then technology transfer in this space. We need to be continuing to do that work. Those are amazing investment models, because I know here we're also talking about investing in America. And it's a challenge right now because of the consumer debt position, because of what is going on with our national fiscal debt position, which is another challenge for us. You know, so we've got to look at growing our economy strategically, rigorously, paying down our debt, and continuing to invest to win the future.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about debt with Congressman Schweikert, who's coming up in just a few moments. But I know you've been a big proponent of the CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
And no surprise, the Trump administration, has criticized that. President Trump has called it corporate welfare. What do you say to those critics, and what would you say to this room to show that, to say that the milestones have been hit, and in the next 2 years, what milestones need to be hit in the CHIPS Act to say that this was worth it?
Well, even more importantly, it's a 21st century industrial policy approach. The reason why foreign markets took over chip manufacturing and critical minerals processing and refining, two things that we were talking about and identifying as weaknesses and challenges while we were saving the auto industry in the Obama administration, by the way, through bipartisan action, is because foreign entities used incentives. Yes, they had low labor costs. We don't want to overlook it. But they gave these industries a reason to invest. When we did CHIPS, large dollar figure, $52 billion. By the way, it was bipartisan. I stood behind the president when he was signing it into law with Democrats and Republicans. Within 1 quarter, it was signed in August of 2022, and within 1 quarter of being signed, we had $200 billion of capital commitments from the private sector. By the end of the president's term, we had $500 billion. I mean, this thing is paying for itself. Now, we've obviously seen chip manufacturing coming back, from the soup to nuts perspective, some of the things that former Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo would talk about, from the original conception phase to shipment. And that's where we want to be, in that sweet spot as a country. We can't stop. Michigan is ripe for this right now, particularly in terms of this other missing piece of our supply chain called critical minerals, and the processing and refining that goes on to the tune of 85 to 95% in China. We're paying to ship it in, and we're dealing with rising costs and lost jobs as a result. I have enterprises in my state, Cerba Solutions, Hemlock Semiconductor, by the way, that's benefited from the CHIPS Act and would benefit from this same type of approach, of which I codified in my legislation called the Unearth America's Future Act. I encourage everyone here to look at that legislation. It's a 100-page bill. It's raw, it's ripe, it's good. 3-pronged approach: loan guarantees, tax credits, and an R&D center of excellence to lessen our dependence on China, create jobs, Michigan jobs always, and lower costs. And this is dovetailing from a 21st century industrial policy approach. Look, it's nice to reflect, memorably on the time period of Abe Lincoln, as the previous speaker was doing. But we are in the 21st century. We are competing with a Chinese Communist Party that is coming to eat our lunch if we don't move. I want to move in the American way, And so, look, I actually think I can continue to convince these guys to work with me on critical minerals. I think I got a good bill here for Michigan and the nation. I come from one of the states that's just one of a few left whose economy drives through the industrial manufacturing sector. It's an exciting time. We got the moonshot, seething through us with new mobility solutions and clearly, I'm very fired up about it.
Yes, I can see the passion. I can feel that passion. So just a last question to you, because you mentioned that you were there at the auto rescue, the bailout back in the great financial crisis. And it always takes a crisis to bring two sides together. So I'm curious, from your time then, what's the playbook, or what do you tear out of that moment and what you learned to work now?
Well, look, I think it's another call to action to say that we shouldn't wait for crisis to act. Cue the policy nerds, right? Cue the dedicated public servants who not only will identify challenges and problems, but create and offer solutions and lead around them. I came to Congress during a polarized time. It's clearly become only more polarized. What I have chosen to do is talk about the things that bring us together. Looking at our manufacturing sector and workforce development opportunities. You mentioned the time I've spent on the Science Committee. Tune into our hearings. They're actually very bipartisan. They're very thoughtful. I had one of my first pieces of legislation signed under the president's first term on artificial intelligence, the detection of deep fake technologies. And so a lot of times when we pursue those strategies, we can make investments for today that yield tremendous results for tomorrow.
Well, Congressman Stevens, thank you so much for joining us. Really great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Exit this way.